The helicopter shuddered through a wall of black clouds, and Senior Chief Petty Officer Yara Okonkwo tightened her grip on the rifle across her lap. She was alone. Stolen aircraft. Nobu Citisaschen. Novakup. Somewhere below her, 460 Americans were dying, and command had decided that was acceptable. The radio crackled with threats she had stopped listening to 20 minutes ago. Court-martial. Treason charges. Career destruction. None of it mattered. She had watched men die on monitors before. 14 years ago, 8 of them. Her first team. Her brothers. She had sworn on their graves that she would never watch again. Before we continue this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Perhaps you know someone who has served, someone who understands what it means to refuse an order that your conscience cannot accept. 12 hours earlier, Yara had stood in the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram, arms crossed, watching the final briefing for Operation Crimson Tide. 460 SEALs and support personnel preparing to insert into the Nangalam Valley for what the intelligence officers called a routine village clearing operation. Routine. The word sat wrong in her chest like a stone she could not swallow. Lieutenant Commander Victor Harlan stood at the front of the room, his voice steady as he walked through the operational phases. Yara had known Harlan for 11 years. They had bled together in places that did not exist on official maps. She knew the rhythm of his breathing under fire, the way his jaw tightened when he was worried, but would not say it. Right now, his jaw was tight. She raised her hand. Harlan paused, and something flickered behind his eyes. He knew what was coming. The intelligence package is thin, Yara said. Her voice carried through the room, and she felt the weight of attention shift toward her. 3 sources, all local. No satellite confirmation on enemy positions. No pattern of life analysis beyond 72 hours. Admiral Cole then, seated in the back row with her aide, shifted in her chair. The Admiral was new to the theater, 6 weeks in country, still learning that Afghanistan punished assumptions. Senior Chief Okonkwo, Cole then said, "The intelligence has been vetted through proper channels. Your concerns are noted." Noted. Yara felt the word land like a door closing. She looked at Harlan. He gave her the smallest shake of his head. Not now. Not here. After the briefing, Harlan found her in the hallway. His hand brushed her elbow, a touch so brief it might not have happened at all. "I read the same package you did," he said quietly. "I have the same questions." "Then why are we going?" "Because the mission is approved. Because 460 men are counting on us to lead them. Because sometimes we do not get to wait for perfect intelligence." Yara stared at him. 14 years of service had taught her the difference between acceptable risk and walking into a trap. This felt like the latter. "I should be with you," she said. Harlan shook his head. "Your rib is cracked. Medical grounded you for 2 more weeks. You know the protocol." Protocol. There was that word again. The word that would echo through the next 12 hours like a curse. She found Petty Officer Second Class Dion Asani in the chow hall, pushing food around his plate with the mechanical movements of a man whose mind was elsewhere. 22 years old, first deployment, more potential than he knew what to do with. Yara had mentored him through selection, watched him transform from a kid with raw talent into something that might one day be exceptional. She sat across from him. Asani looked up, and she saw the fear he was trying to hide. "First combat operation," she said. It was not a question. Asani nodded. "They say the village is friendly. They say it should be straightforward." Yara considered her next words carefully. "Nothing is straightforward," she said. "But you are ready. You have trained for this. When the moment comes, trust your training and trust the men beside you." Asani swallowed. "What if I freeze?" "Then you unfreeze. Fear is not the enemy, Dion. Hesitation is. Feel the fear, acknowledge it, then do what needs to be done anyway." She reached across the table and gripped his shoulder. The gesture was maternal in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. 460 men were about to fly into uncertain darkness, and this young man was one of them. "You come back," she said. "That is an order." Asani almost smiled. "I thought you were not my commanding officer, Senior Chief." "I am not. But I am the woman who will make your life very difficult if you get yourself killed on your first deployment." The operations center hummed with controlled urgency as the helicopters lifted off. Yara stood at the back of the room, watching the screens that tracked the formation moving toward the valley. Harlan's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional, calling out checkpoints as they passed. 30 minutes to insertion. 20 minutes. 10. Yara felt the wrongness growing in her chest with each passing moment. She studied the terrain on the monitors, the village nestled in the valley, the mountains rising on 3 sides. A funnel. A kill box. If someone wanted to trap a large force, this was exactly the geography they would choose. 5 minutes to insertion. The helicopters began their descent. On the infrared feeds, Yara could see the village below, quiet and dark. Too quiet. Too dark. Where were the cooking fires? Where were the animals that should be moving in the fields? She keyed her radio, her thumb finding the button before her mind had fully committed to the action. Crimson Actual, this is Okonkwo. Recommend aboard. Village pattern of life is wrong. No thermal signatures consistent with civilian population. Static. Then Harlan's voice, tense. Okonkwo, we are 30 seconds from touchdown. Cannot aboard on instinct. Victor, Yara said, and she heard her own voice break protocol by using his first name. Something is wrong. The first helicopter touched down. The world exploded. On the monitors, Yara watched the village erupt with muzzle flashes from every direction. RPG trails streaked across the infrared feeds. The audio channels dissolved into chaos. Overlapping voices shouting contact reports and casualty counts, and called for fire support that could not come fast enough. She gripped the edge of the console until her knuckles went white. 460 men had just flown into a trap, and she was standing in an air-conditioned room watching them die. Harlan's voice cut through the noise, somehow still controlled. All elements defensive positions. We are surrounded. Requesting immediate extraction. The operations officer began coordinating rescue helicopters. The first one lifted off within 8 minutes, a response time that would have been impressive under any other circumstances. It was shot down before it cleared the valley rim. The second helicopter lasted 45 seconds longer. The third never made it past the initial approach. Admiral Colvin's voice came through the command channel, heavy with a weight that Yara recognized. She had heard that weight before, 14 years ago, from a different admiral making a different impossible decision. Zone is black, Colvin said. No further extraction attempts authorized until enemy positions are neutralized. Yara turned slowly to face the admiral. Black men abandoned. Black meant acceptable losses. 460 men, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Colvin met her eyes. I am aware of the number, Senior Chief. On the monitors, the thermal signatures of dying Americans flickered and faded. Somewhere in that chaos, Harlan was still fighting. Asani was experiencing his first combat, which might also be his last. Yara walked out of the operations center. Someone called after her, asking where she was going. She did not answer. The screens in the tactical operations center showed hell in infrared. Bodies scattered across the village center, some still moving, most not. Muzzle flashes erupted from elevated positions on 3 sides of the valley, a coordinated kill zone that had been prepared long before the first American boot touched Afghan soil. 12 kilometers away, in a stone compound overlooking the carnage, Colonel Marko Resnick lowered his binoculars and allowed himself a small smile. Former Spetsnaz, now freelance, he had spent 3 months designing this trap. Every detail calculated. Every American response anticipated. He knew their protocols better than they did. He knew that after losing 3 helicopters, they would declare the zone black. He knew they would write off their men as acceptable losses rather than risk more aircraft. Predictable. The Americans were always predictable. Back at Bagram, Yara stood in the corridor outside the operations center, her hands pressed flat against the concrete wall. She could hear the radio traffic bleeding through the door behind her. Casualty reports. Ammunition counts. Harlan's voice, increasingly strained, coordinating a defense that could not hold forever. 73 confirmed dead in the first hour. The number would climb. She thought about the 8 names tattooed on her left shoulder blade, hidden beneath her uniform. Her first team. 14 years ago, in a valley not so different from this one, she had watched them die because command decided rescue was too risky. She had been 20 years old, the sole survivor, pulled from the wreckage by a patrol that arrived 6 hours too late. She had sworn an oath over their graves. Never again. Never watch. Never accept. Never let protocol become an excuse for abandonment. Her feet carried her toward Admiral Colvin's temporary office before she had consciously decided to move. The Admiral was on a secure line when Yara entered without knocking. Cole then looked up, irritation flashing across her features, then something else. Recognition, perhaps, of what was coming. "I will call you back," Cole then said into the phone. She set it down carefully. "Senior Chief Okonkwo, I assume you're here to tell me I am wrong." Yara closed the door behind her. 460 men are in that valley. 47 confirmed dead, number rising. We have assets. We have capability. We're choosing not to use them. We lost 3 helicopters in 40 minutes. Colvin's voice was measured, controlled, the voice of someone who had made terrible calculations before. The enemy has anti-aircraft positions we did not anticipate. Every bird we send becomes another casualty report. Then we find another way. There is no other way. Cole then stood, and for a moment Yara saw the weight the Admiral carried. This was not cruelty. This was mathematics. The cold arithmetic of command that traded lives for lives and called the result acceptable. By morning, we will have air support from Kandahar. We will neutralize the enemy positions. We will extract the survivors. By morning, half of them will be dead. Cole then did not flinch. Perhaps. And if I send more helicopters tonight, we lose the helicopters and their crews, and the men in the valley still die. I'm trying to minimize total casualties, Senior Chief. That is my job. Yara stepped closer. Her cracked rib throbbed with each breath, a reminder of why she was here instead of in that valley with her people. Your job is to bring Americans home. All of them. Whatever it takes. My job is to make impossible decisions and live with the consequences. Cole then met her eyes. You think I want this? You think I do not know what those men are going through right now? I know. I know exactly. And I also know that emotion is not strategy. Outrage is not a tactical plan. I have a tactical plan. The words hung in the air between them. Cole then studied her for a long moment. You are grounded. Medical restriction. Even if I wanted to send you, I could not. Send me anyway. And when you collapse from a punctured lung halfway through the operation, when your injury gets you killed, and I have to explain to the review board why I sent a medically unfit operator into combat. Cole then shook her head. No. The answer is no. Return to your quarters, Senior Chief. That is an order. Yara did not move. Admiral, I have seen this before. 14 years ago. A valley in Kiener Province. 8 men. My team. Command made the same calculation you are making now. They died waiting for morning. Every single one of them. Something shifted in Colvin's expression. I read your file. I know what happened to you. Then you know I cannot watch it happen again. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. I am sorry for what you experienced. Truly. But I cannot authorize a mission based on one operator's trauma response. The decision stands. Zone remains black until dawn. Yara felt something harden inside her chest. A door closing. A choice being made. Understood, Admiral, she said. Her voice was flat, empty of everything except resolve. She turned and walked out of the office. Behind her, she heard Cole then pick up the phone again, already moving on to the next crisis, the next calculation, the next acceptable loss. 2 military police officers were waiting for her in the corridor. Cole then had anticipated her next move. The Admiral was many things, but stupid was not one of them. Senior Chief Okonkwo, the taller one said, we have orders to escort you to your quarters. Yara looked at them. Young, earnest, following orders because that was what they had been trained to do. She could not blame them for that. Lead the way, she said. They walked her across the base, past the motor pool, past the helicopter pad where the remaining birds sat waiting for a mission that would not come until dawn. 460 men had 12 hours of darkness ahead of them. How many would see the sunrise? Her quarters were small, functional, identical to 1,000 other rooms on 100 other bases. The MPs positioned themselves outside her door. She heard the lock engage from the outside. Protective custody. For her own good. Yara sat on the edge of her bunk and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Master Chief Solomon Vance, retired. The man who had trained her. The man who had pulled her out of that valley 14 years ago when no one else would come. He answered on the second ring. His voice was rough with sleep, 3 in the morning on the East Coast. Yara, what is wrong? Not a question, a statement. He knew her too well to think she would call at this hour for anything less than disaster. She told him. The operation. The ambush. The black zone. The Admiral's refusal. 460 men waiting to die while protocol demanded patience. Vance listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long silence. What are you planning to do? He asked. Whatever I have to. Another silence. She heard him moving, probably sitting up in bed, probably reaching for the lamp on his nightstand. The same lamp he had kept for 30 years, the one his wife had bought him before she passed. You cannot shoot your way through an army, Vance said. Not even you. I know. So what is your actual plan? Yara looked at the door. Beyond it, 2 MPs stood guard. Beyond them, a helicopter pad. Beyond that, a valley full of dying Americans. I'm going to be smarter than whoever built that trap, she said. I just need you to tell me how. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he began to talk. Vance spoke for 20 minutes without pause. His voice carried the weight of 30 years of special operations, every lesson written in blood and survival. Yara listened with her eyes closed, building the tactical picture in her mind. The enemy set this trap to keep people in, Vance said. They're oriented inward, focused on the kill zone. Their anti-aircraft positions are designed to intercept helicopters approaching the valley from the standard flight corridors. But you're not going to use standard corridors. Where do I go? There is a ravine system on the eastern approach. Too narrow for conventional insertion, too rocky for a landing zone. But if you come in low, under their radar coverage, you can set down about 3 kilometers from the valley rim. From there, you approach on foot. 1 person against an entrenched force. 1 person they're not expecting. Vance paused. They built this trap for a conventional response. Helicopters. Quick reaction forces. The American playbook. They did not build it to defend against a single operator coming from outside their perimeter. Yara opened her eyes. Even if I get into position, I cannot eliminate enough of them to matter. There are hundreds of fighters out there. You are not trying to eliminate them. You're trying to create gaps. Vance's voice shifted, becoming the instructor she remembered from 15 years ago. Think about it. They have the valley surrounded, but they're spread thin to maintain that coverage. Every position you take out creates a hole in their net. Create enough holes, coordinate with the men inside, and you give them a corridor to fight through. That requires communication with the trap force. Encrypted Channel 7. Harlan knows it. You know it. Nobody else does. Yara felt something shift in her chest. The impossible was becoming possible. Not easy, not safe, but possible. What about extraction? She asked. That is the part you cannot control. Vance was quiet for a moment. If you create enough chaos, if you show command that the situation has changed, they might authorize assets. Or they might not. You could do everything right and still watch those men die. I know. Do you? Because once you steal that helicopter, there's no coming back. Court-martial. Discharge. Prison. Everything you built, everything you sacrificed, gone. Yara thought about the names on her shoulder. 8 men who never got to build anything else. 8 men who trusted that someone would come for them. I know, she said again. Vance exhaled slowly. Then God help you, Yara. And God help anyone who gets in your way. She ended the call and sat in the darkness of her quarters, running through the plan again and again. The ravine approach, the foot movement, the systematic elimination of enemy positions, the coordination with Harlan. Each step carried 100 ways to die, but each step was also achievable. That was all she needed. Achievable. The window of her quarters faced the helicopter pad. Through the reinforced glass, she could see the Black Hawks sitting in their neat rows, rotors still, waiting for pilots who would not come until morning. She had basic flight certification, enough to take off, navigate, and land without killing herself. Probably. She checked her watch. 2 hours until shift change for the MPs outside her door. The night crew would be tired, attention flagging. That was her window. Yara moved silently around her quarters, gathering what she needed. Her rifle was locked in the armory, but she had a backup piece hidden in her footlocker. Against regulations, but regulations had stopped mattering to her about an hour ago. She found her tactical vest, her night vision equipment, her medical kit. She packed light. Speed would matter more than supplies. At 0300, she heard the shift change happening outside her door. Voices exchanging information. Footsteps. The click of the lock being checked. She waited another 30 minutes, letting the new guards settle into the boredom of their post. Then she moved to the window. The latch had been painted shut years ago, a security measure that assumed no one would ever need to leave this way. Yara pulled a knife from her boot and worked the blade along the seal, slow and patient, making no sound that would carry through the thin walls. The paint gave way in small flakes. She tested the latch. It moved. Cold air rushed in as she eased the window open. The helicopter pad was 200 meters away, across open ground that offered minimal cover. Cameras monitored the perimeter, but she knew their blind spots. She had walked this base 1,000 times, studying its vulnerabilities out of habit. Now that habit would save her. She dropped from the window and pressed herself against the wall, waiting for any sign of alarm. Nothing. The base hummed with its usual nighttime activity, generators and distant voices and the occasional vehicle moving between buildings. The cameras swept in predictable patterns, and she timed her movements to their rhythm. 15 years of infiltration training reduced to a midnight jog across her own base. The helicopter pad was guarded by a single airman, young and bored, scrolling through his phone in violation of about 6 different regulations. Yara felt a moment of sympathy for him. He was about to have a very bad night. She approached from his blind side, footsteps silent on the concrete. By the time he sensed her presence, her hand was already over his mouth, her voice low and calm in his ear. "Do not move. Do not speak. I'm not going to hurt you, but I need you to cooperate." The airman's body went rigid with fear. She could feel his heart hammering through his back. "I am going to remove my hand. You're going to give me the keys to that Black Hawk, and then you're going to lie face down on the ground and count to 500. Nod if you understand." He nodded frantically. She released him, and he spun around, eyes wide, recognizing her face. "Senior Chief, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done hours ago." "The keys." His hand trembled as he unclipped the key ring from his belt. "I could get court-martialed for this." "You will not." Yara took the keys. "Tell them I threatened you. Tell them I had a weapon. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. But give me 10 minutes before you raise the alarm." The airman looked at her, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or the recognition that some orders were worth breaking. 10 minutes, he said. Then he lay face down on the concrete and started counting. Yara climbed into the Black Hawk and began the startup sequence. The rotors turned slowly at first, then faster, building to the familiar whine that meant flight was possible. She pulled on the headset and heard the radio already crackling with confused voices. Someone had noticed. She lifted off just as the first shouts reached the helicopter pad. The bird was sluggish, fighting her unfamiliar hands, but it climbed. It flew. Below her, Bagram shrank to a cluster of lights in the darkness. Ahead, somewhere beyond the mountains, 460 men were still dying. She pointed the helicopter toward them and opened the throttle. The radio exploded with voices the moment she cleared Bagram's perimeter. Command frequencies overlapping, officers demanding identification, threats escalating with each passing minute. Yara listened to it all with detached calm, the way she might listen to rain against a window. Unidentified aircraft. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Failure to comply will result in hostile action. She recognized the voice. Colonel Hendricks, the night operations commander. A decent man who followed rules because rules were all he understood. Yara keyed her radio one final time. "This is Senior Chief Okonkwo. I am not returning. Court-martial me when I get back." She switched off the radio. The Black Hawk fought her through every maneuver, its controls responding to her inexperienced hands with reluctant jerks and stutters. She was certified for emergency flight operations, the bare minimum required for operators who might need to take control if pilots were incapacitated. Flying well was not the same as flying at all, and right now she was barely managing the latter. Mountains rose around her like black teeth against the darker sky. She dropped altitude, hugging the terrain, using the ridgelines to mask her approach from enemy radar. The ravine Vance had described appeared on her navigation display, a thin snake of shadow cutting through the eastern approach. She guided the helicopter down into the narrow passage, wingtips close enough to the rock walls that she could have reached out and touched them. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. One wrong input, and she would become a fireball scattered across Afghan stone. The ravine opened into a small plateau, barely large enough for a landing zone. She brought the Black Hawk down hard, the skids scraping against loose rock, the airframe groaning in protest. But she was down. She was alive. Yara killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, her hands trembling against the controls. 30 seconds to breathe. 30 seconds to let the fear pass through her. Then she grabbed her gear and stepped out into the darkness. The valley was 3 kilometers east. She could see the distant flicker of muzzle flashes against the mountainsides, the ongoing battle reduced to pinpricks of light from this distance. Somewhere in that chaos, Harlan was still fighting. Asani was still surviving. She had to believe that. She moved 12 kilometers to the west. In the heart of the kill zone, Lieutenant Commander Victor Harlan pressed his back against a crumbling mud wall and tried to count the men still breathing around him. The number kept changing. Every few minutes, another body went still. They had established a perimeter in what remained of the village center, using the rubble of collapsed buildings as cover. The enemy held the high ground on 3 sides, pouring fire down into the depression where the Americans had clustered. Every attempt to break out had been pushed back with casualties. Harlan keyed his radio. All elements, ammunition count. The responses came back grim. Most teams were down to their last magazines. The heavy weapons were out entirely, expended in the first hours trying to suppress enemy positions that seemed to multiply every time one was silenced. Beside him, Petty Officer Asani was working on a wounded SEAL, hands steady despite the chaos around them. The kid had not frozen. Harlan had watched him move through the worst of the initial ambush, pulling men to cover, returning fire, doing everything right. Whatever fear he carried, he had learned to function through it. "How is he?" Harlan asked. Asani did not look up. "Femoral bleed. I have it controlled, but he needs surgery within the hour or he loses the leg. Extraction is not coming until dawn." Asani's hands paused for just a moment. Then he resumed his work, accepting the information the way SEALs were trained to accept the unacceptable. Harlan looked up at the stars visible through the smoke. Somewhere out there, Yara was watching this on a monitor, probably fighting with command about the decision to abandon them. He knew her well enough to know she would not accept it quietly. He also knew that accepting was different from changing. A burst of automatic fire raked their position, showering them with dust and stone fragments. Harlan pressed himself lower, feeling the impacts through the wall at his back. The enemy was probing, testing, looking for weaknesses. They had all night to find them. Senior Chief Okonkwo, one of the younger SEALs, said. He was bleeding from a gash above his eye, his voice carrying the edge of hysteria that came from too much combat and too little hope. She would know what to do. She always knows what to do. Harlan felt the words like a knife. Yes, he said. She would. What he did not say was that knowing what to do and being able to do it were different things. Yara was grounded, confined, probably in a gar by now. Even if she wanted to come, even if she had a plan, there was no way command would authorize it. He pushed the thought away and focused on the immediate problem. They had enough ammunition for maybe 2 more hours of sustained defense. After that, it would come down to knives in hands and the willingness to die, making the enemy pay for every inch. "All right," Harlan said, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "We are not dying in this valley. We hold until dawn, we get extracted, we go home. Anyone who does not believe that can keep it to themselves." The men around him straightened slightly. Not much, but enough. Belief was a weapon too, and right now, it was the only one they had in unlimited supply. 3 kilometers away, Yara reached the edge of the valley rim and went prone, pulling her rifle into position. Through her scope, she could see the enemy positions arrayed below her, muzzle flashes marking each one like candles on a map. She counted them methodically. 23 positions visible from this angle. Probably another 15 on the sides she could not see. 38 positions. Hundreds of fighters. One woman with a rifle and a plan that relied on being smarter than the man who built this trap. She settled her breathing and began to study the pattern of the enemy's movements. Were they clustered? Were they rotated? Were the gaps formed when attention shifted elsewhere? The first shot would announce her presence. After that, she would be hunted. She had to make every round count, every movement precise, every decision correct. Yara placed her crosshairs on the first target and waited for the moment to begin. She did not take the shot. Not yet. Patience was the difference between a sniper and someone with a rifle, and Yara had spent 15 years learning to wait. The enemy positions below her operated on a rhythm, a pattern of movement and coverage that revealed itself only to those willing to watch long enough to see it. The fighters rotated every 40 minutes. During the transition, there was a window of approximately 90 seconds where overlapping fields of fire broke down. 90 seconds where gaps appeared in the net surrounding the valley. Yara mapped each gap in her mind, building a mental picture of the escape corridor she needed to create. The eastern approach was weakest, defended by only 4 positions compared to the 8 or 9 on the other sides. If she could eliminate those 4 positions during a rotation window, the trap seals would have a chance to break through. 4 positions, 90 seconds. At this range, she could make the shots. The question was whether she could make them fast enough, accurately enough, before the enemy understood what was happening and adjusted. She checked her watch. The next rotation would begin in 12 minutes. That gave her time to reposition, to find angles on all 4 targets, to prepare for the fastest and most precise shooting of her life. Yara moved along the ridgeline, staying low, using the rocks and scrub brush for concealment. Her cracked ribs screamed with every movement, pain radiating through her side like fire. She ignored it. Pain was information, nothing more. It told her body was damaged. It did not tell her to stop. She found her position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the eastern approach. From here, she could see all 4 enemy positions spread across a 500-meter front. The ranges varied from 800 to 1,200 meters. Difficult shots under ideal conditions. Nearly impossible shots in darkness, at speed, with lives depending on each one. Nearly impossible was not the same as impossible. 8 minutes until rotation. Yara settled into her position and began her breathing exercises. In through the nose for counts. Hold 4 counts. Out through the mouth for counts. Her heartbeat slowed. Her hands steadied. The world narrowed to the 4 points of light that mark her targets. She thought about the men in that valley. Harlan, wounded and fighting. Asani, discovering what he was made of. 460 Americans who had trusted their leadership to bring them home. Leadership had failed them. Protocol had failed them. She would not. 5 minutes. Through her scope, she watched the enemy fighters preparing for their rotation. Men rising from covered positions, stretching, exchanging words with their replacements. They were relaxed, confident. Why would they not be? They had sprung a perfect trap, killed dozens of Americans, shot down 3 helicopters. Victory was simply a matter of waiting for dawn. They did not know she was here. That was her only advantage, and it would last exactly as long as her first shot. 3 minutes. Yara placed her crosshairs on the first target, a machine gun position 820 meters away. Two men, one on the gun, one feeding ammunition. She would take the gunner first. The loader would freeze for a critical second, long enough for her to transition to the second target. 1 minute. The rotation began. Men moving, positions shifting, the careful choreography of a force that believed itself in complete control. Yara watched the gaps open exactly as she had predicted. She exhaled half a breath and held it. The first shot broke the silence like a crack of thunder. The machine gunner dropped without a sound, dead before his body understood what had happened. Yara was already moving, her scope finding the second position, a sniper nest 1,100 meters to the north. 2 seconds. The second shot. Another body falling. 3 seconds. The third position. Her crosshairs found a man rising to investigate the sound of gunfire. He never completed the motion. 4 seconds. The fourth position. The longest shot, 1,215 meters, a fighter scrambling for cover who had realized too late that death was hunting him. 4 shots. 4 kills. 6 seconds. The eastern approach was open. Yara keyed her radio to the encrypted channel Vance had mentioned. Crimson Actual, this is Ghost Mother. Eastern corridor is clear. You have maybe 3 minutes before they figure out what happened. Move now. Static. Then Harlan's voice, thick with exhaustion and something that might have been disbelief. Yara? How the hell are you here? Long story. Move your men east. I will cover your withdrawal. We have wounded who cannot walk. Then carry them. Yara scanned the enemy positions through her scope. The other fighters were reacting now, scrambling, trying to understand where the shots had come from. She picked another target and fired. A fifth body fell. 3 minutes just became 2. She heard Harlan shouting orders, his voice carrying the desperate energy of a man who had just been handed an impossible chance at survival. Below her, she could see movement in the American perimeter, bodies rising, men lifting wounded comrades, the first steps toward the gap she had created. The enemy was reorganizing faster than she had hoped. Fighters rushing to fill the eastern positions, commanders screaming into radios. She fired again, dropping a man who was trying to set up a new machine gun nest. Then again, killing a fighter who had spotted the American movement and was raising his weapon to fire. Her ammunition was finite. Her position was increasingly compromised. Every shot gave the enemy more information about where she was, and she could already see teams beginning to move in her direction. 90 seconds. The Americans were halfway to the gap, but the enemy was closing it. Yara made a calculation she did not like. She could not cover their withdrawal from this position. There were too many angles, too many threats converging. If she stayed here, the enemy would overrun her position and seal the gap before Harlan's men could get through. She needed to move, not back toward safety, but forward, into the valley, into the trap. Yara gathered her rifle and started down the slope, toward the kill zone she had just spent 12 hours trying to reach. The slope was steeper than it had looked from above. Yara half ran, half slid down the rocky terrain, her boots finding purchase where they could, her hands scraping against stone when they could not. Her ribs sent jolts of agony through her torso with every impact, but she kept moving. Stopping meant dying. Stopping meant the men below her dying. She reached a shallow depression 50 meters from the valley floor and threw herself into cover. From here, she could see the eastern corridor, still open but narrowing as enemy fighters converged from both sides. The Americans were moving through in clusters, some running, some carrying wounded, all of them exposed and vulnerable. Yara raised her rifle and began to shoot. Not precision shots now. Not the careful, methodical work of a sniper picking targets from concealment. This was suppression fire, rapid and aggressive, designed to make the enemy keep their heads down long enough for people to get through. A fighter rose from behind a wall to fire at the retreating Americans. Yara put a round through his chest. Another appeared on a rooftop, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. She dropped him before he could take aim. Her magazine ran dry. She swapped it for a fresh one without conscious thought, her hands performing the motion they had performed 10,000 times in training. The enemy was returning fire now, rounds cracking past her position, kicking up dirt and stone fragments. They knew where she was. They were coming. Crimson elements, keep moving, she said into her radio. Do not stop for anything. Harlan's voice came back strained. We have men who cannot keep this pace. We're going to lose people. You will lose more if you slow down. Trust me. She fired again, dropping a fighter who had gotten too close to the corridor. Then another. Her count was climbing, but so was the number of enemies converging on her position. Mathematics, she could not win. A burst of automatic fire raked the depression, forcing her flat against the ground. Stone chips cut her cheek, her hands, her neck. She felt blood running warm down her skin, but could not spare the attention to assess the damage. Through the chaos, she kept her scope moving across the battlefield, searching for threats, eliminating them one by one. The Americans were almost through the gap now. Another minute, maybe less, and they would be clear of the kill zone. Then she saw something that made her blood freeze. On the far side of the valley, a group of fighters was setting up a heavy machine gun with a clear line of fire on the corridor exit. If they got that weapon operational, they would cut down the retreating Americans like wheat before scythe. The range was 1,400 meters, beyond her comfortable limit, beyond what anyone would call a reasonable shot. She had maybe 30 seconds before the gun was ready to fire. Yara settled her breathing, adjusted for wind, for elevation, for the curve of the earth itself. Her crosshairs found the man feeding the ammunition belt into the weapon. She fired. The round traveled for almost 2 seconds. An eternity, long enough for doubt to creep in, for the certainty of failure to whisper in her ear. The ammunition handler collapsed. The belt tangled. The gun fell silent before it ever spoke. 1,400 meters. One shot. One life saved multiplied by however many Americans would have died in that corridor. She allowed herself half a second of satisfaction. Then she was moving again, because the enemy had finally pinpointed her position and were closing from 3 directions. Yara scrambled along the depression, looking for better cover, finding none. The valley floor offered nothing but open ground and scattered rubble, death traps masquerading as shelter. She was running out of options. Her radio crackled. Ghost Mother, this is Crimson Actual. Most elements are through. We are establishing a defensive position on the eastern ridge. Yara felt relief wash through her, followed immediately by the cold recognition of her own situation. She was still in the valley, still surrounded. The gap she had created was closing behind the Americans she had saved. Get them to the extraction point, she said. I will find my own way out. Negative. We are not leaving you. Victor. Her voice was calm, the calm of someone who had accepted what was coming. You have 400 men depending on you. Get them out. That is an order. You do not outrank me, Yara. Then consider it a request from someone who cares about you. Silence on the radio. She could picture him on the ridge, torn between duty and something older, something neither of them had ever spoken aloud. I'm coming back for you, he said finally. I know. She switched off the radio and turned to face the enemies closing around her. 16 rounds left in her magazine. 2 spare magazines on her vest. 52 rounds total against an unknown number of fighters who wanted her dead. Yara smiled. She had faced worse odds. Not often, but she had faced them. She raised her rifle and began to move through the valley, hunting the hunters, becoming the ghost they would learn to fear. As she moved, she noticed something strange. Some of the enemy fighters were using hand signals she recognized. American hand signals. The kind taught in joint training exercises with Allied forces. She watched more carefully, tracking a squad of fighters as they coordinated their movement. The signals were precise, professional, exactly as they would be taught at Fort Bragg or Camp Pendleton. Someone had trained these men. Someone with American military knowledge. Someone who had access to tactics and techniques that should never have left classified briefing rooms. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The ambush had not just been good intelligence. It had been inside intelligence. Someone at Bagram, someone with access to operational planning, had given this enemy everything they needed to build a perfect trap. There was a traitor, and whoever it was, they were still at Bagram, still with access, still in a position to do more damage. Yara filed the information away, and kept moving. Survival first, justice later. But she would not forget. Yara moved through the ruins like smoke, formless and silent. The village that had been a trap was now a maze, collapsed walls and burning structures creating a labyrinth of shadows and blind corners. She used every inch of it, slipping between cover points, doubling back on her own trail, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. The enemy was searching for her in force. She could hear them calling to each other in Pashto, their voices carrying frustration and something else. Fear. They had expected to slaughter Americans with impunity. They had not expected one woman to tear their perfect ambush apart from the inside. She counted her ammunition again. 41 rounds remaining. Each one had a matter. A patrol passed within 10 meters of her hiding spot. 3 fighters moving in tactical formation. American formation. She watched them through a crack in the rubble, noting their discipline, their equipment, their confidence. These were not village militia. These were trained soldiers, professional and deadly. She let them pass. Engaging would give away her position, and she needed to conserve ammunition for the moments when she had no choice. When silence returned, she keyed her radio. Crimson Actual, status report. Harlan's voice was steadier now, the raw edge of combat fading into focused command. We have reached the eastern ridge. Defensive perimeter established. Counting heads now. Casualties? A pause that told her everything. 53 confirmed dead. Another 41 wounded, 12 of those critical. We're going to lose more without medical evacuation. Yara closed her eyes for a moment. 53 men who would never go home. 53 families who would receive the worst knock on their door. She added their weight to the names she already carried. What about Asani? She asked. Alive. Harlan's voice warmed slightly. He kept a lot of people breathing tonight. You trained him well. Relief flooded through her, unexpected in its intensity. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that the kid had made it. I have information, she said. The enemy is using American tactics. Hand signals, formations, movement patterns. This was not just good intelligence. Someone on our side gave them everything. Silence on the radio. When Harlan spoke again, his voice was cold. You are certain? I'm looking at it. Whoever trained these fighters had access to our playbook. Full access. That narrows the list considerably. It does. Yara scanned her surroundings, checking for approaching threats. Why get out of here? I'm going to find them. When, not if. Harlan caught the word. What is your situation? Surrounded. Low on ammunition. But I've been in worse spots. That was not entirely true, but it was close enough. We're coming to get you, Harlan said. Negative. You have 400 men who need extraction. Focus on them. Yara, we are not leaving you in that valley. She heard the emotion beneath his professional tone, the same emotion she had been suppressing for 11 years. They had never talked about it, never acknowledged what lived in the space between them. There had always been reasons. The job, the protocol, the understanding that operators did not complicate their lives with attachments that could compromise the mission. But here, in the ruins of a village that was supposed to be her grave, the reasons seemed less convincing. Victor, she said, using his first name for only the second time that night. I did not come here to die. I came here to bring people home. Let me finish the job. The radio was silent for a long moment. Then his voice, rough with something he would never say directly. You come back. That is an order. She almost smiled. You do not outrank me either. Then consider it a request from someone who cares about you. Her own words returned to her. She felt them settle in her chest, warm against the cold reality of her situation. I will see you on the other side, she said. She switched channels before he could respond, tuning to a frequency she had not used in years. The frequency that connected directly to Bagram's Tactical Operations Center. Admiral Cole then answered immediately. Her voice was sharp with tension. Senior Chief Okonkwo, you are in a significant amount of trouble. I am aware. Yara kept her voice level. I am also aware that 400 Americans are alive on the Eastern Ridge because I disobeyed your orders. Silence. Then, measuring careful, Cole then spoke. We have been monitoring satellite feeds. What you accomplished should not have been possible. And yet here we are. Yara checked her surroundings again, spotted movement 200 meters to her north. I do not have time for recriminations, Admiral. I have intelligence that changes everything. She told Cole then about the American tactics, the hand signals, the professional training evident in the enemy fighters. She explained what it meant, spelled out the implications that Cole then was surely already calculating. Someone on your base sold out 460 Americans, Yara said. Someone with access to operational planning. Someone who knew exactly what we were walking into and told the enemy how to kill us. Cole then was quiet for several seconds. The Tactical Operations Center would be in chaos right now. Officers scrambling to process the implications, the scope of the betrayal reshaping everything they thought they knew. I believe you, Cole then said finally. I will begin an internal investigation immediately. That is not enough. Yara watched the movement to her north resolve into a foreman patrol heading directly toward her position. I need extraction for the men on the ridge. They are sitting ducks without air support. Another pause. Senior Chief, you stole a helicopter. You disobeyed direct orders. You may have just exposed the worst security breach in this theater's history. And now you are asking me to trust your judgment. Yara raised her rifle, tracking the approaching patrol. I am asking you to save 400 lives. Everything else can wait. The patrol was close now, close enough that she could see their faces in the pre-dawn light. Young men, most of them, believers in a cause she did not share but could understand. They were about to die because she had no choice. She fired 4 times in rapid succession. 4 bodies fell. Admiral, she said into the radio, her voice steady despite what she had just done. What is your decision? The radio crackled with static. Yara held her position behind a collapsed wall, for fresh bodies cooling in the dirt 20 meters away, and waited for Admiral Cole then to make a choice that would determine whether 400 men lived or died. Extraction authorized, Cole then said finally. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had just bet her career on a woman she had ordered arrested 12 hours ago. I am dispatching everything we have. Apaches, Black Hawks, medevac birds. They will be at the eastern ridge in 40 minutes. Yara exhaled slowly. Thank you, Admiral. Do not thank me yet. Colvin's tone hardened. You are still facing charges when this is over. Multiple charges. But right now, I need you to stay alive long enough to testify about what you have seen. Understood. She switched back to Harlan's frequency. Extraction is coming. 40 minutes to the ridge. Harlan's relief was audible even through the distortion of encrypted radio. Copy that. What about you? Working on it. That was optimistic. She was deep in enemy territory, with 33 rounds remaining and dawn approaching fast. Once the sun came up, her ability to move unseen would evaporate. She needed to be out of this valley before first light, and first light was maybe 20 minutes away. Yara studied the terrain through her scope, looking for a route back to the eastern ridge. The corridor she had created was closed now, enemy fighters having filled the gaps she had torn open. But the enemy's attention was divided, some units pursuing the Americans on the ridge, others searching the valley for her. Divided attention meant gaps. Gaps meant opportunity. She spotted a drainage ditch running along the southern edge of the valley, a shallow depression that offered minimal cover but connected to a dry riverbed that wound toward the eastern approach. If she could reach the riverbed without being seen, she might be able to work her way back to friendly lines. It was a thin chance, but thin chances were all she had ever needed. She moved. The first 100 meters were the worst, open ground with scattered rubble that forced her to sprint between cover points. Twice, she had to freeze as patrols passed nearby, pressing herself into the shadows, willing her heartbeat to slow. She reached the drainage ditch and dropped into it, the shallow depression offering just enough concealment to hide her silhouette. The mud was cold and wet, soaking through her uniform, but she barely noticed. Discomfort was irrelevant. Survival was everything. Crawling on her belly, she began the slow journey toward the riverbed. Progress was measured in meters, each one earned through patience and silence. Her cracked ribs screamed with every movement, but she had long since learned to partition pain into a separate compartment of her mind. She was halfway to the riverbed when she heard voices ahead. Yara froze, pressing herself flat against the mud. Two fighters stood at the junction where the ditch met the riverbed, smoking cigarettes and talking in low voices. Sentries, posted to watch the exact route she needed to take. She considered her options. Going around would cost time she did not have. Going back was not an option. That left going through. 31 rounds. She could not afford to waste any on targets she might be able to avoid. Yara drew her knife. She moved forward in absolute silence, using the pre-dawn darkness and the distraction of their conversation to close the distance. 10 meters. 5. Close enough to smell the tobacco smoke, to hear the cadence of their words. The first man died without a sound, her blade finding the gap between his skull and spine. The second had time to turn, time to see her face, time to understand what was happening. Not time to scream. She lowered his body to the ground and kept moving. The riverbed was dry and rocky, offering better cover than the ditch, but harder terrain to navigate silently. Yara picked her way through the stones, moving as fast as she dared, aware that every minute brought more light to the sky. Behind her, she heard shouting. The bodies had been discovered. She broke into a run. The eastern ridge rose ahead of her, maybe 500 meters away. She could see the American perimeter now, men in defensive positions watching the valley below. Safety was so close she could taste it. A burst of gunfire erupted from her left, rounds cracking past her head, striking the rocks at her feet. She dove behind a boulder and returned fire, dropping one fighter, then another. More were coming, drawn by the sound of shooting. Yara ran again, zigzagging across the open ground, bullets chasing her every step. Her lungs burned. Her rib felt like a knife twisting in her side. The ridge seemed to grow no closer, no matter how hard she pushed. 200 meters. She heard the distinctive thump of a rocket-propelled grenade being launched. Instinct took over, throwing her sideways just as the explosion tore apart the ground where she had been standing. The shockwave lifted her off her feet and slammed her down onto the rocks. For a moment, everything was silence and ringing ears and the taste of blood in her mouth. Then hands were grabbing her, dragging her, American voices shouting commands she could not quite understand through the fog in her head. She looked up and saw Harlan's face above her, his expression caught between relief and fury. "I told you to stay on the ridge," she managed. "And I told you I was coming back for you," he said. More gunfire erupted around them, SEALs engaging the enemy fighters who had pursued her across the open ground. Harlan pulled her into cover behind a rock formation, his hands checking her for wounds with practiced efficiency. "Can you walk?" he asked. Yara tested her legs. Everything hurt, but everything worked. "I can walk." "Then walk. We have incoming birds in 15 minutes, and I'm not explaining to Admiral Colden how I got you out of the valley just to lose you on the ridge." She let him pull her to her feet, leaning on him more than she wanted to admit. Around them, the battle continued, but the tide had shifted. The Americans held the high ground now, and the enemy's momentum had broken against the wall of their defense. In the distance, she heard the first faint thrum of approaching helicopters. Extraction was coming. They were going to make it. Then a new sound cut through the noise of battle. A voice on the enemy's frequency, speaking English with a Russian accent, calm and cold and utterly without fear. "The American sniper," the voice said. "Find her. Kill her. Whatever it costs." Yara recognized the tactical cadence, the confidence of command. Whoever was speaking was not a foot soldier. He was the architect of all of this. She keyed her radio to the frequency she had heard and spoke a single sentence. "Come find me yourself." Silence. Then laughter, soft and genuinely amused. "Perhaps I will," the voice said. "Perhaps I will." The helicopters came in low and fast, Apache gunships leading the formation with their rotors cutting the dawn air like blades. Behind them, Black Hawks descended toward the ridge in waves, door gunners laying suppressive fire across the enemy positions below. Yara watched from the American perimeter as the first medevac bird touched down, medical personnel flooding out before the skids had fully settled. The critical wounded went first, carried on stretchers by men who moved with desperate efficiency. She should have been on one of those stretchers. Her body was a catalog of damage: cracked rib, now possibly broken, lacerations across her face and hands, a concussion that made the world swim every time she turned her head too fast. But she stayed on her feet because the job was not finished. The voice on the radio haunted her. Russian accent. Command authority. The architect of 460 American deaths, still out there, still watching. Harlan appeared beside her, his arm in a makeshift sling, blood soaking through the bandage on his shoulder. The wound he had taken in the valley was worse than he had let on, but he was still standing, still commanding, still refusing to leave until every one of his men was accounted for. Asante, Yara said. Where's he? Loading wounded onto the second bird. Harlan gestured toward the helicopter where the young SEAL was helping lift a stretcher. He has not stopped moving since we reached the ridge. Whatever you taught him, it stuck. She watched Asante work, his movements efficient and calm despite the chaos around him. 22 years old, first deployment, and he had become the kind of operator she had hoped he would be. Some lessons could only be learned in fire. The Apache gunships were making strafing runs across the valley now, their chain guns tearing apart the enemy positions that had held the Americans trapped for so long. Secondary explosions bloomed across the landscape as ammunition stores cooked off. The trap was being dismantled piece by piece. But somewhere in that destruction, the man with the Russian voice was still alive. Yara could feel it, the same instinct that had warned her about the ambush in the first place. She keyed her radio to the enemy frequency she had used before. Still there? Silence for a moment. Then the voice returned, as calm as if they were discussing weather. I am impressed, Senior Chief. Truly, you have cost me a great deal tonight. Yara scanned the valley through her scope, searching for the source of the transmission. Who are you? A professional. Like you. The voice carried a hint of admiration. My name is Resnick, Colonel Marko Resnick, formerly of the Russian Federation, currently freelance. You built this trap. I did. 3 months of preparation. Every detail calculated to exploit American predictability. And it worked perfectly until you. She found him. A compound on the western ridge, partially concealed by a rock overhang. Through her scope, she could see a figure standing at a window, binoculars raised, watching the American extraction with the detached interest of a chess player reviewing a lost game. I see you, she said. I know. Resnick lowered his binoculars and looked directly at her position, as if he could see her scope glinting in the dawn light. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The range was extreme, over 1,700 meters, well beyond any shot she had taken tonight. Wind was picking up with the sunrise, and her hands were trembling from exhaustion and blood loss. A responsible operator would let him go, would report his position, and let the Apaches handle it. Yara was not feeling responsible. She settled into a firing position, ignoring the pain that screamed through her body. Harlan appeared beside her, taking in the situation with a single glance. That is a long shot, he said quietly. Yes, you might miss. I might. She adjusted her scope, calculating windage, elevation, the curvature of the earth across that vast distance. But I will not. Harlan was silent for a moment. Then he lowered himself beside her, pulling out his own binoculars. I will spot for you. She felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not known she was carrying. 11 years of unspoken words, and this was how they finally said them, side by side, doing the work that defined them both. Wind is coming from the northwest, Harlan said. Maybe 8 knots. Just 2 mils left. Yara made the correction. Through her scope, Resnick had not moved. He was watching her, waiting to see what she would do, testing her the way she had tested his trap. He thinks I will not take the shot, she said. He does not know you very well. No. She let out half a breath and held it, her finger finding the trigger. He does not. The shot traveled for nearly 3 seconds. An eternity of flight, the bullet arcing across the valley, fighting wind and gravity and distance. Yara watched through her scope. Her heart stopped, her lungs empty, everything suspended on that single point of copper and lead. Resnick moved at the last instant. Not fast enough to escape entirely, but fast enough to turn a kill shot into something less. The round took him in the leg, spinning him backward into the compound. He was wounded. He was not dead. Yara cycled the bolt and searched for another shot, but Resnick had crawled out of view. She could hear him on the radio, his voice strained with pain, but still controlled. "Impressive," he said. "I underestimated you. You will not get that chance again." Laughter, wet and harsh. "Perhaps not. But we will meet again, Senior Chief Okonkwo. I promise you that." The radio went silent. Yara lowered her rifle and stared at the compound where Resnick had disappeared. The Apaches were moving toward that position now, rockets streaking toward the structure. Whatever remained of his command post would be rubble in moments. But she knew, with a certainty that settled cold in her stomach, that Resnick would survive. Men like him always did. Behind her, the last of the wounded were being loaded onto helicopters. Harlan touched her shoulder. "We need to go," he said. She nodded but did not move. 53 dead. A traitor still hidden at Bagram. An enemy who had slipped through her crosshairs. Victory was supposed to feel better than this. "Yara," Harlan said again, softer now. "We saved them. 407 men are going home because of what you did tonight." She turned to look at him, this man she had known for 11 years and never allowed herself to want. His face was gray with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes held something she had not seen there before. Permission, maybe, an acknowledgement that some rules were worth breaking. "Let's go home," she said. They walked toward the waiting helicopter together. The hospital at Bagram smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Yara sat on the edge of gurney while a medic wrapped her ribs, each layer of bandage pulling tighter against the fractures that had become breaks somewhere during her run across the valley floor. 3 fractured ribs, the medic said. Concussion. Lacerations requiring 47 stitches. Contusions across 60% of your body. He shook his head. "You should be dead, Senior Chief." "I have heard that before." The medic finished his work and stepped back, eyeing her with a mixture of professional concern and something close to awe. Word had spread through the base in the hours since the extraction. The woman who stole a helicopter. The sniper who broke an ambush from the inside. The operator who saved 400 men by refusing to accept that they were already lost. Yara did not feel like a hero. She felt like a woman with broken ribs and a target on her back, waiting for the consequences of her choices to arrive. They arrived 20 minutes later in the form of Admiral Patricia Colvin. The Admiral entered the medical bay alone, her uniform immaculate despite what must have been a sleepless night. She stood at the foot of Yara's gurney for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Senior Chief Okonkwo," Cole then said, "you present me with a considerable problem." Yara met her eyes. Imagine Ido. You stole military aircraft. You disobeyed direct orders from a flag officer. You conducted an unauthorized combat operation that could have resulted in an international incident. Cole then paused. You also saved 407 American lives and exposed a security breach that my intelligence officers are still trying to comprehend. The traitor. Cole then nodded. We have identified him. Major Thomas Whitfield, intelligence liaison. He was passing operational details to a network connected to Resnick for the past 18 months. We arrested him 2 hours ago. Yara felt something cold settle in her chest. Whitfield. She knew him, had briefed him before operations, had trusted him with information that had gotten 53 men killed. Why, she asked. Money. Colvin's voice was flat with disgust. $2 million in an offshore account. He sold out 460 Americans for money. Yara said nothing. There were no words for that kind of betrayal, no response adequate to the scope of it. 53 men dead because one man wanted to be rich. He will face court-martial. Cole then continued. Treason charges. He will never see the outside of a prison cell again. That is not enough. No. Colvin's eyes met hers. It is not, but it is what the law allows. The Admiral moved to the window, looking out at the flight line, where helicopters were still ferrying wounded to surgical units. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I was wrong," Cole then said. "Why declare the zone black? When I ordered you confined, I was following protocol, and protocol would have killed 400 men." Yara watched her, surprised by the admission. Admirals did not typically confess their mistakes to senior chiefs. "I made a calculation based on available information," Cole then continued. "The calculation was correct. The decision was wrong. There is a difference, and I'm still learning what that difference means. What happens to me now?" Cole then turned back to face her. "Officially, you will receive a letter of reprimand for unauthorized use of military equipment. Unofficially, that letter will be lost in administrative processing and never reach your file." Yara blinked. "And the rest of it?" "The rest of it is being classified at the highest levels. As far as the official record is concerned, Operation Crimson Tide encountered unexpected resistance and was successfully extracted through coordinated air support. Your name will not appear in any report. You are burying it. I am protecting you." Cole then stepped closer, her voice dropping. "There are people in Washington who would use what you did as a weapon. Against the military, against this command, against the operators who depend on the freedom to make decisions in the field. The best way to protect that freedom is to ensure this story never becomes public." Yara understood. She did not like it, but she understood. The military was a machine that ran on rules, and she had broken every rule that mattered. Letting her become a symbol would invite scrutiny that could damage far more than it helped. "There's one more thing," Cole then said. She reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I have submitted a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. Given the classified nature of the operation, it will be awarded in a private ceremony. No press, no publicity, just recognition of what you accomplished." Yara looked at the box, but did not take it. "I did not do it for a medal. I know. That is why you deserve one." Cole then set the box on the gurney beside her. "Think about it." The Admiral left without another word. Yara sat alone in the medical bay, the velvet box untouched beside her. Through the window, she could see the sun climbing higher over the mountains, burning away the last shadows of the night that had nearly killed her. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. Harlan stood in the entrance, his arm properly splinted now, his shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages. He looked as exhausted as she felt, but he was smiling. "Heard you got a visit from the Admiral," he said. "Heard you should be in bed recovering from a gunshot wound." Harlan shrugged with his good shoulder and walked to her gurney, settling into the chair beside it. "I wanted to check on you." "I am fine." "You are a terrible liar." She almost laughed. The sound surprised her, rusty and unfamiliar after hours of tension and violence. Harlan's smile widened. "There she is," he said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had shared something that words could not capture. The space between them felt different now, charged with possibility that had not existed before. "What happens now?" Yara asked. "Now we heal." Harlan reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then we figure out the rest." She looked down at their joined hands, this simple contact that would have been unthinkable 24 hours ago. Protocol, regulations, professional distance, all the rules she had lived by for 15 years, and all it had taken to break them was one night of impossible choices. "Resnick is still out there," she said. "I know. He will come back." Harlan squeezed her hand. "Then we will be ready." Through the window, Yara watched a helicopter lift off, carrying wounded men toward Germany and eventual home. 407 lives, continuing because she had refused to accept the unacceptable. It was not enough. It would never be enough. 53 names would join the 8 she already carried, permanent weights on a soul that had learned to bear them. But it was something, and sometimes something was all you could ask for. 3 days passed before Yara could walk without assistance. She spent most of that time in the hospital, receiving visitors she did not expect, and processing a reality she was still learning to accept. The SEALs came first. Men she had served with, men she had trained, men she had pulled from the valley. They arrived in small groups, awkward and grateful, not quite sure how to thank someone for their lives. She told each of them the same thing. "You would have done it for me. Most of them believed her. Some of them knew better. Asani came on the second day, his arm in a sling from a wound he had not mentioned during the chaos of extraction. He stood at the foot of her bed for a long moment before speaking. I froze, he said. When the ambush started, for about 3 seconds, I froze. Yara studied him. And then? And then I remembered what you told me. Feel the fear, acknowledge it, do what needs to be done anyway. He swallowed. I thought about you saying that, and I started moving. 3 seconds is nothing, Dion. Some men freeze forever. Asani shook his head. It felt like forever. I kept thinking about all the men who might die because I could not make myself move. But you did move. That is what matters. Not the fear. Not the hesitation. The choice you made after. He was quiet for a moment, processing her words the way he had processed everything she had taught him over the past year. Then he straightened, something settling in his expression. I want to be like you, he said. Why I've been doing this for 15 years. I want to be the kind of operator who steals a helicopter and saves 400 men. Yara almost smiled. I would recommend finding a less dramatic approach. The paperwork alone will take months. Asani laughed, the sound young and bright, and full of a future he had almost lost. Thank you, Senior Chief, for everything. After he left, Yara lay in her hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the person she had been at 22, raw and eager and utterly unprepared for what waited in the valleys of Afghanistan. She thought about the 8 men who had died because she had not been good enough to save them. She thought about the 15 years between then and now, the relentless work of becoming someone who could do what needed to be done. Asani would get there. She could see it in him, the same fire that had driven her through the worst moments of her career. He would make mistakes and learn from them. He would carry his own names, his own weights, his own ghosts. And someday, he would pass on what he had learned to someone younger, continuing a chain that stretched back through generations of warriors. On the 3rd day, she received a different kind of visitor. Master Chief Solomon Vance walked into her hospital room like he had walked into 1,000 others, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. 62 years old, retired for 4 of them, and still the most formidable man Yara had ever known. She sat up straighter despite the pain in her ribs. Master Chief. Vance settled into the chair beside her bed, his eyes taking in her injuries with the practiced assessment of a man who had seen worse. You look like hell. I have been told. He was silent for a moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. You did good, Yara. Better than good. What you accomplished in that valley will be studied in training programs for decades, even if they never use your name. I had a good teacher. Vance smiled, a rare expression that softened the hard lines of his face. You had the raw material. I just helped you shape it. They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 operators from different generations sharing the understanding that came from a lifetime of impossible choices. Yara thought about the phone call 3 nights ago, Vance's voice rough with sleep, giving her the tactical framework that had saved 400 lives. I need to ask you something, she said. Vance waited. When you pulled me out of that valley 14 years ago, when you came for me after command had written us off, did you know you would make it? Vance was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. No, I thought there was maybe a 30% chance I would get to you alive. Maybe 20% I would get us both out. But you came anyway. I came anyway. He met her eyes. Because some things matter more than odds, more than protocol, more than the calculations that tell you something is impossible. Yara felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back. I never thanked you. Not properly. You just did. Vance reached over and squeezed her hand, a gesture of affection he had never shown during their years of training. What you did 3 nights ago, that was you passing it on, becoming the person who comes when no one else will. That is all the thanks I need. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. One more thing. That Russian you wounded. Resnick. Yara tensed. What about him? Word through channels is he survived. Extracted by his own people before the Apaches could finish the job. He is in the wind, probably already out of country. I figured as much. Vance nodded. He will remember you. Men like him do not forget the ones who beat them. I am counting on it. Something passed between them, an understanding that did not need words. Resnick was not finished. Neither was she. Somewhere down the line, their paths would cross again, and one of them would not walk away. "Watch your six," Vance said, "and call me if you need anything. Anything at all." Then he was gone, leaving Yara alone with the morning light streaming through her window and the weight of unfinished business settling in her chest. That afternoon, she discharged herself against medical advice. The doctors protested. She ignored them. There was somewhere she needed to be. The memorial wall stood in a quiet corner of Bagram, a simple structure of black granite bearing the names of every American who had died in this theater of operations. Yara stood before it in the fading light, her eyes moving across the names until she found the newest additions. 53 names. 53 men who would never go home. She reached out and touched the stone, feeling the carved letters beneath her fingertips. Cold and permanent, the only monument these men would ever have. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have been faster. Should have seen it sooner. Should have saved all of you." The names did not answer. They never did. But she spoke to them anyway, the same way she spoke to the 8 names tattooed on her shoulder blade, the one she had carried for 14 years. "I will find him," she said. "Resnick, the man who built the trap that killed you. I will find him, and I will make sure he pays." A promise made to the dead, witnessed only by the setting sun and the weight of her own conscience. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something to hold onto in the darkness ahead. The ceremony took place in a windowless room at the Pentagon, 6 weeks after the Valley. No press, no cameras, no record that it had ever happened. Yara stood at attention in her dress uniform, her ribs still aching beneath the fabric, her body still healing from wounds that would leave scars she would carry forever. Beside her, Harlan stood in his own dress blues, his shoulder finally free of bandages, his presence a steady warmth she had learned to stop questioning. Admiral Cole then read the citation in a measured voice. The words were carefully chosen, scrubbed of any detail that might compromise classified operations. They spoke of extraordinary valor, of selfless service, of actions above and beyond the call of duty. They did not mention stolen helicopters or defied orders or a one-woman war against an entrenched enemy. Some truths were too dangerous for official records. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward, the Medal of Honor gleaming in his hands. Yara had seen this medal before, always on someone else, always accompanied by stories of sacrifice she could barely comprehend. Now it was being placed around her own neck, and she felt nothing but the weight of it against her chest. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Yara Okonkwo," the secretary said, "the President of the United States, in the name of Congress, takes pleasure in presenting the Medal of Honor to you for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty." The room was small, maybe 20 people in attendance. Admiral Cole then, the secretary, a handful of senior officers who had been briefed on the classified details. Harlan, and in the back row, Master Chief Solomon Vance, wearing his own dress uniform for the first time in 4 years. Yara met Vance's eyes across the room. He nodded once, a gesture that carried more meaning than any medal ever could. The ceremony ended with handshakes and photographs that would never be released. Yara endured the congratulations with practiced grace, accepting words she did not feel she deserved. 53 men had died in that valley. No amount of recognition could balance that equation. Afterward, she found herself alone in a hallway, staring out a window at the gray Washington sky. The medal hung heavy around her neck, a reminder of everything she had done and everything she had failed to do. Harlan appeared beside her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. "You look like someone who just received the highest military honor in the country." "I look like someone who needs a drink." "That could be arranged." He paused. "How are you feeling?" Yara considered the question. She thought about the valley, the gunfire, the body she had left behind. She thought about Resnick, still out there, still breathing, still planning whatever came next. She thought about the 53 names on the memorial wall and the 8 names on her shoulder blade. "I'm feeling like this is not over," she said. Resnick. He is out there, rebuilding, planning, waiting for another opportunity to kill Americans. She turned to face Harlan. I wounded him. I humiliated him. Men like that do not forget. Men like that also make mistakes when they are angry. Harlan's voice was calm, the voice of a tactician assessing a problem. If he comes for you, he will be sloppy, emotional, vulnerable. You think he will come for me specifically? I think you put a bullet through his leg and challenged him on an open frequency. He has to respond. His reputation depends on it. Yara nodded slowly. The thought had occurred to her in the quiet hours of her recovery, in the moments between sleep and waking when her mind refused to rest. Resnick would come. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. And when he did, she would be ready. Then we prepare, she said. We gather intelligence. We track his movements. And when he makes his move, we finish what I started in that valley. Harlan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. We? Yara looked at him. This man she had known for 11 years and never allowed herself to love. The rules had kept them apart, the protocols and regulations that governed every aspect of their professional lives. But she had broken every rule that mattered in that valley, and she was still standing. We, she said, if you are willing. Harlan smiled, the expression transforming his tired face into something younger, brighter. I have been willing for 11 years. I was just waiting for you to catch up. She almost laughed. The sound surprised her, the same way it had surprised her in the hospital, rusty and unfamiliar but real. For the first time since the valley, something other than duty and grief moved through her chest. They walked out of the Pentagon together, into the weak winter sunlight, the Medal of Honor hidden beneath Yara's coat. The world did not know what she had done. The world would never know. And that was fine because she had not done it for recognition or glory or a piece of metal on a ribbon. She had done it because 460 men had needed someone to come for them when no one else would. Outside, a car was waiting to take them to the airport. In 3 days, they would be back at their duty station, back to the work that defined them both. But first, they had 48 hours of leave, and Yara intended to spend every minute of it remembering what it felt like to be something other than a weapon. Harlan held the car, door open for her. Where to? Senior Chief. Anywhere but here. She climbed into the car, feeling the weight of the metal shift against her chest. Somewhere warm. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can hear myself think. I know a place, Harlan said, sliding in beside her. Beach house in North Carolina. Belongs to a friend. No neighbors. No phones. Just ocean and silence. That sounds perfect. The car pulled away from the Pentagon, carrying them toward a future neither of them could predict. Resnick was still out there. The traitor Whitfield was awaiting trial. The 53 dead would never come home. The war would continue, with or without them, grinding on in its endless cycle of violence and sacrifice. But for now, in this moment, Yara allowed herself to breathe, to feel the warmth of Harlan's hand closing over hers, to imagine a life that included something beyond the next mission, the next threat, the next valley full of Americans who needed saving. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, or tell us about someone you know who showed courage when it mattered most. Perhaps you have witnessed moments when doing the right thing meant breaking all the rules. The car merged onto the highway, Washington shrinking in the rearview mirror. Ahead, the road stretched toward the horizon, toward tomorrow, toward whatever came next. Yara watched the landscape blur past her window and made herself a promise. She would find Resnick. She would finish what she started. But first she would live. Really live for the first time in 15 years. The dead she carried would want that for her, and she was finally ready to believe them.